Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Hello, 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 and welcome. As you come on, we're going to get started in just a few seconds. We've got lots of people jumping on, but as you come on, drop your name in the chat, introduce yourself, let us know your name and where you're from. I see some familiar faces. Good to see so many new folks and as well as some regulars. Mason, it's lovely to see you again. Sue, it's nice to see you again as well. And Kathy, it's nice to see you. I get to see you on a more regular basis, but it's also lovely to see you. Great to have you here. So we have folks from Barrie and Melissa at Melissa Weblog. I hope I'm not mispronouncing that. I'm sorry, Melissa, if I did. We've got Mason, the chutzpah guy from Washington, TDC area. Awesome. I know that there's folks from Toronto. We've got Kathy in Minneapolis, Emily from Toronto. Wonderful, wonderful. I'm gonna say to all, once and for all, welcome and a quick introduction. My name is Nick Kindler, and I'm going to be hosting this webinar today. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the CEO of Kindler and Company. I'm an executive communication coach. I'm a keynote speaker. I'm also an author. And as we dive in, I've already said this, but a lot of people are joining. We've got a really great turnout today. It's terrific. We have over 25 attendees so far, and people are still streaming in. What I'd like you to do is just, again, if you're just joining, drop your name in, where you live, where you're zooming in from. I'd love to know what you do. And if you have a question about podcasting, start preparing that as well. But drop it in. Tamara from Mississauga, Claude, je m'excuse, from New Jersey. We have Tara from WITS. Hello, Tara. Nice to see you. And who else do we have? We have Rebecca. Oh, hello, Rebecca from Toronto. Nice to see you. It'd be good to know also what industry you represent, because it sounds like there's a lot of different folks from different industries. And one of the benefits of doing these webinars globally is that we can connect people from different industries and learn from each other. So let us know, just drop it in. Let us know where you're in. Oh, higher education. We've got people in fintech. Currently in pharma. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. We have, I'm going to just say right now, by the way, Kathy, who's in tech consulting, Claude, who's a business coach. We have really got a terrific turnout, the best turnout we have yet. And we also have a few members of my team that are here as well. Okay, let's get started. Sue has already said I've been a guest on podcasts, but not tried hosting. I'm assuming, Sue, that you're going to have some questions as well for our special guest today, and we're going to dive into that in just a moment. All right, very quickly, folks. Again, my name is Nick Kindler, and I'm the CEO of Kindler and Company. At Kindler and Company, we help innovators become better communicators. Personally, I am a TEDx speaker, an executive communication coach. I've worked with thousands of global leaders, helping them become better at pitching, better at presenting. I can't believe I just said that. Better at presenting. I'm also a board member. I'm actually in a few days, I've become the current president of EO Toronto. I'm also a faculty at the Growth Institute, a former faculty of Singularity University, and a certification faculty partner helping certify speakers from around the world for Singularity University. And I'm also a lifelong entrepreneur and work as a consultant and coach for all of the companies you see here, and many, many more. And finally, I'm an author. I wrote a book last year during COVID and published it. You can find it at impactbook.ca, but don't go there just yet, because we're going to do a draw at the end. I'm going to give 3 copies of my book away, not just ebooks, but we're going to ship them to you. So stick around and we'll draw those 3 names. By the way, we're drawing them from the people that are involved on the chat. So all you have to do is say hi, and you will get potentially chosen for one of those 3 books. What are we doing here today? It's incredible how many people are showing up, by the way. This is the program is called Living Impact. I work with leaders and entrepreneurs and executives and innovators from around the world, helping them communicate their impact, helping them communicate their innovation, their technology, their strategy, their initiative, so that they can actually make an impact in the world. And what I do in this program is we have conversations with leaders about the challenges of communication, and we usually chat for about 30 minutes or so, and then we answer questions, or we often answer questions throughout. And today, as you already know, is on how to podcast. And before I introduce our speaker, our guest, I just want to throw out the house rules. And those of you that know me and have been in my programs know that I love my rules. Here are the house rules. The first is, and by the way, can everyone from all over the world, it's incredible where everybody is coming from, can everyone just say yes, that they can see my PowerPoint, or no, I didn't check this before. Thank you. Oh, I love it. I love the quick response. Thank you. Here are the rules. Here are the rules. This is going to be weird for a webinar, but yes, I want you to unmute. That means if you've got a question, yes, raise your hand digitally, but then I'll ask you to unmute, and I want you to share your questions and your thoughts. We can have conversations with this group. I want you to get involved, ask the questions. If you've got an insight you want to share about your experiences on podcasts, I want you to share those as well. I want you, as I said, to share, and I want you to be bold, give your big questions, get your big questions out there, get your big ideas out there as well. Here's my promise to you, is I want you to put these things, as I joke, they're weapons of mass distraction, and I put them on airplane mode. I'm all focused on you for the next hour and my special guest. So I would love it if you could focus just on this to get the most out of our time together. I also want you to put aside your preconceived notions of what podcasting is and what your expectations are. So I want you to unlearn what you have been thinking is the regular way of doing things when it comes to recording podcasts or being on a podcast, and get ready to create space for some new learnings. And finally, I want you to have fun with us. We are going to have a deep, in-depth conversation about podcasting, but we don't do things in a very dry way here at Kindler & Company. We like to have fun. Can I get a hell yeah on chat if you can agree to these rules? Let me see if I got some from the audience here. Thank you, Katie. Sue, right on. Awesome, Rebecca. I love that. I love the all caps, the exclamation marks. Okay, let's dive in to how to podcast. And I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and I wanna talk a moment and just introduce our special guest, Raul Batt. Now, Raul is a really, really interesting guy. I'd love to say that I've known him for years, but a really good friend of mine, I was having dinner with him about a month or so ago, and he said, oh, you know, you'd really like this guy. I'm doing some really interesting work with him. And as soon as I met Raul, I knew that I wanted to get him on this webinar. So who is he? Raul is a seasoned, accomplished music and audio professional. And this is in his bio, and I do love it. So I'm going to actually read this piece. He walks the fine line between versatility and specialization. And he does this because he's got multiple hats and he plays in multiple lanes. So let me just give you a little bit of an example of what he does. He is the director of audio post and sonic strategy at Audio Branding, which is a really cool concept. We're going to talk about audio branding today. He's also a composer and sound designer. He does feature-length video, films, television shows, and video games. He's an audio producer of Pod Squad, which is a co-founded scripted podcast startup that aims to entertain audiences of all ages. And here's the one that I love the most, because people don't do this because they want to retire doing this. They do this because they give back. And he is an audio production faculty at Seneca College here in Toronto, teaching students 14-week courses in audio production. And by the way, I'm jumping over a lot of the experience, but he's worked with brands like Disney, Hot Wheels, Nokia, Jameson Irish whiskey, and I hope you got paid in Irish whiskey. That's delicious stuff. But he's also worked with the History Channel, YTV, and many, many more. So, folks, make sure you put your mode on speaker mode so that we can see Raul in your view. And let's give a warm welcome to Raul Batt. Can I just see a show of warm hands? Wonderful. Raul.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. Thanks for taking the time to be here and listen to us. Thank you, Nick, for having me on your podcast as a guest. I am super excited. And I know that just before the call, in case anyone's wondering why I'm sort of deliberately slowing down, Nick and I were having a conversation that was so relatable. He was saying, when I get excited about something, I tend to speed up. And so just know that even though I'm slowing down right now, there's this tremendous force within me that's forcing me to slow down. But left to my own device, I am so passionate about this subject that at some point you will notice that I will go higher pitched and I will speed up. and if because of that or my accent, if any of my message comes in the way, do not hesitate to ever reach out and interject or send a quick message and say, well, what was that? I missed it. Can you please repeat or what have you? So, but thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's so good to have you here. So let's start. Let's get a little bit of background. First of all, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? You're here in Toronto?
Yeah, absolutely. To be specific, I'm here in Oakville, and I think I read somewhere in the message someone's from Oakville. So I'm based out of Oakville, GTA. I have lived in Toronto in North York actually for a couple of years before I moved to Oakville, and I've been here for nearly a decade. Prior to that, I've spent a couple of years in London, UK, because I know there's a London, Ontario as well, and that's where I studied. I did my master's in audio production. I worked and I freelanced as a live sound engineer, and did a lot of other cool freelance gigs while I was there. Nice. And prior to that, I was born and raised in India, Mumbai to be specific. If my accent did not give that away, that's where I was born and raised. And for the last almost 8 to 10 years, I've been here in Canada, and I would say living the life.
So let me just say that I won't be going into the digging into the life and times of a young Raul, but I'd love to in another podcast. But let's talk about that master's in audio engineering. I'd like to understand what attracted you first to sound and audio. And by the way, folks, this is soft entry. We're going to dive deeply into the questions that you may have. So keep those ready and get ready to post them. But tell me what got you into it.
Great question, Nick. I honestly don't know where to start, but I suppose my experiences from childhood comes to mind. Growing up in a family, especially my mom's side family, there was a lot of exposure to chants in Sanskrit, which is arguably India's oldest language, or one of the oldest languages. And although not all words made sense to me, I could tell that there was a lot of positive impact on my psyche, on my well-being. And, having parents, especially my dad, has always been very curious about understanding the why behind things. And I would always ask him, well, why do we chant when it comes to certain auspicious occasions like Diwali, or if there are certain other rituals that take place? And he would always allude to something like sound and vibrations. At the time, it did not make much sense to me. But more recently, and even in the years prior to that, there's been so much of scientific research that's gone into, chants, whether it's in Sanskrit or from any culture or language from across the globe. We have hymns, we have psalms, we have prayers, we have all kinds of either things that are spiritual or religious in nature. That's where the intrigue started from. I could tell that even though I couldn't see it, at a subconscious and at a very deep level, it had a profound impact on me. So that's where the intrigue and the curiosity started. Before I could even make sense of things like notations, chords, harmonies, groove, tempo, and all of the musical attributes that I was later on formally trained into. Fast forwarding on from there, again, I was super fortunate to have parents who supported my musical interest from an early age. I was formally trained in Hindustani or Indian classical music. And I say that categorically because when I say classical music, it defaults to Western classical music, as in Beethoven, Mozart, and stuff. But there is Indian classical music as well. And then years later as well, I did my music in theory at the ABRSM, which stands, it's a really long-winded name, so bear with me. It stands for Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music, and that's out of the UK. And that's where I learned to read and write in different clefs, and sort of just music reading and writing and understanding music theory from a Western point of view. And I say that in a very broad way. And then I guess in the last 10, 15 years of having done this professionally, especially when you consider things from a sonic branding point of view, there's so much of science and research that's gone behind this. I mean, think about it. And I'm going to sort of touch upon very high level aspects here. And then I'm happy to deep dive if someone's curious to go in more depth, or even happy to follow up later. But
Raul, I'm gonna jump in because I think you're about to see this. Because are you about to dive into what sonic branding is, sonic strategy?
No. Just sort of just more from a personal point of view as to the emotional impact it's had on me, the well-being and the state of well-being that everyone gets into, regardless of what you listen to. You could be listening to death metal for all I care, but if it moves you in a way that has a positive impact on your psyche, it's the emotional impact, right? It's the endless possibilities in terms of genres and the different artistic expressions. Like I said, the intriguing research that's gone into it. Like, just think about something as simple, and I'm saying this simple because it's apparent to me, but think about the Doppler effect, for example, right? In the mid 1900s or the early 1900s, through an experiment Mr. Doppler, I can't recall his first name, forgive me. He packed a train full of trumpeters and had the train move from point A to point B. Now, this is the only way he could prove his effect or his theory. He had a group of people, scientists, journalists, stationed at a platform, and he asked the trumpeters to hold down a single note, a continuous single same note from point A to point B. As the train moved from one point to the other, everyone on the platform noticed that despite the fact that the musicians held down the same note, the perception was that the note actually dropped in pitch as the train came closer. So the Doppler effect says, further the object, lower the pitch or the perceived pitch, and nearer the object, higher the pitch. So these kind of sort of phenomena and psychoacoustical phenomena that has always intrigued me. So I could go on, like I said, about things that I'm passionate about, but these are some of the aspects that I can touch upon on why music and sound attracts me. And here I am doing what I love, and I just keep going on.
No, it's great. Now I'm going to ask everybody, because you touched on the emotional impact that sound can have, and I'd love just if people can share, because I have other questions about sonic strategy and branding, but can people just share, something immediately came to mind for me as you were speaking about the impact, the emotional impact, and how it can change or regulate your emotions. When I wrote my book, I listened almost exclusively to Glenn Gould's Bach Goldberg variations. It calms me. It allows me to focus. I'd love to hear if people can share in the chat what they listen to and it could be a podcast, right? This morning I was listening to Smartless. It makes me chuckle. Like, it's light, it's frothy. I can start my day on a very calm note. What do people have here? Oh, Katie's got Naudi, sorry, incredible. Anyone else have something that helps them regulate? And I'd love to see, or not regulate, but helps them calm or has that emotional impact on them. Please drop it into the chat. Music, deep house for focus. Thank you, Crystal. And music impacts my emotional state. Radio headspace. Focus at will for ADHD folks. Interesting, fascinating. Now, let's talk about the emotional connection, Raul, because there are really emotional, we are connected to brands because of emotion. I'm not going to talk about branding per se, but we know that we love brands. If you're an Apple person, you feel a certain way about it when you see an ad or a new iPhone or a new whatever. If you're a Google person, whatever, and not just Google and Apple, it can be any brand. Talk to me about this sonic branding. And I promise folks, we're going to jump to podcasting right after this, because I know that's what, but this is really important because sonic branding is connected to the podcasting as well. So talk to me about sonic strategy. What is it?
Sure thing. That's a great question, Nick. So I'm gonna lead by an amazing quote that I always like to include in the audio brand guides that I write for brands, and that is, "Music speaks where words fail." That is the foundation and the core essence of sonic branding. And of course, it's a lot more than that. So let's first answer your question head on. What is sonic branding or sonic strategy? Everything that a brand and all its stakeholders, the in-house marketing leaders, the marketing team, the creative agencies, the media buying agencies, whatever the industry may be, or however you operate and make yourself known and grow your business via channels of marketing and brand engagement with your audience and your consumers. It's everything and anything a brand should be doing to engage with your target audience, with your potential target audience, using the power of music and sound. Now, that again is really broad. So now let's go into the silos of what music and sound or power of music and sound entails. So here's how I would bullet list it at a very high level, again, because I know that the focus is a lot on podcasting, and I could do a 4-hour webinar just on sonic strategy alone, because that's what I do day in, day out as part of my job at audio branding. So first things first, sonic identity. What is a sonic identity? With every high level attribute, I will mention in an example so it's instantly relatable and easily understandable by, if you come across a foreign term or something that you haven't heard before. So let's just say sonic identity or sonic DNA. If any one of you are like Mac nerds or Apple fans like I am, and I'm not an Apple fanboy, I love the Macs, and I've been a Mac user for 15 plus years. And when you start up a Mac, you hear that reassuring hum, right? There is that deep connection that when you hear that reassuring hum, you're about to start something that's premium. You know that you're about to start something that's dependable and something that's going to allow you to do your work in the easiest way, on the most creative way possible.
Raul, I didn't even think about it until you said that. I rebooted my computer last night because I was having an issue. And if I didn't hear that chime, that hum, whatever that is, I think I would have had a little bit of anxiety, like things aren't working right.
There you go. There, absolutely. And that's, so we all understand the power of music and sound in a branded context, in an instinctive way. That's the beauty of a sonic strategy, that when I start objectively explaining to potential or existing clients, well, they instantly start nodding their heads. I'm like, yeah, you know what? Absolutely, that makes sense, because we all instinctively understand. It's such a base level sense for us. So, without sort of going off a tangent, so sonic identity or sonic attribute of a brand is important. So, that could be your audio logo. That could be a very important UX sound, like the Mac startup sound. It could also be a jingle or a soundtrack that you are emotionally connected to, and you instantly makes you think of that brand. Second, and again, this may not
give us an example. Give us an example of a brand sonic strategy that's popular.
Let's see. In recent times, I feel like Volkswagen and Kia. These are two brands. And when I'm saying recent, I mean as recent as the last 6 months to a year, because I could go on with many examples. Like MasterCard is another brilliant example, or Shell coming up with an audio logo where they hired like a Hollywood level orchestra and a recording studio just to get their sonic brand, or rather their sonic logo in place. But to give an example, Kia. They did a research for a couple of years and came up with something called the Kia Instrument. Now, it's not a physical hardware-based instrument as you would imagine, like a keyboard or a guitar, but it's a virtual instrument that anyone can download on their PC or Windows. And it has, I saw in the comments, and I'm sort of connecting the dots here, tying back to, I saw in the comments, somebody said certain frequencies that align, I believe, Tara, you said certain frequencies that align with different chakras. And somebody else mentioned the music impacts the emotional state more than spoken words, and certain frequencies and sounds. Now, there's a reason why when we step outside in nature, that, when we take a walk in nature, or the recurring beautiful lapping sound of waves at a beach, there's a reason why it induces you into a state of calm and in an open state of creative consciousness. It's because, scientifically speaking, and I'm not talking from an emotional or personal point of view, but very objectively speaking, most of these ambient natures and sounds are pleasant, and that's because it's primarily made up of pink noise. I'm not going to nerd out on and explaining what pink noise is about. I mean, I can share a link and you can Google it. It's basically a group of random frequencies where the energy and the power levels are more or less distributed evenly. And I can go on, but just for the sake of explaining pink noise at a high level. Now, that's what induces your brain to go into an altered or a calm state of consciousness that actually, and I believe it enhances a certain wave in your brain. Now, I'm not a neuroscientist or any expert, so I'm not going to mention the wrong wave here and get corrected and have an embarrassing moment, but I believe it's the theta or delta wave. But that uptick in that particular wave or brainwave activity is what makes it extremely conducive for you to get into this creative and productive mode. I know that a lot of, for example, individuals in their teens or late teens or young adulthood these days listen to lo-fi hip hop. If you Google lo-fi hip hop playlist, you will see so many options and playlists come up, and that's what a lot of people in their adolescence or young adulthood and teens are listening to while they study or do their work or assignments.
So we have a couple of quick questions, and I've got so many questions too, and I want to dive into the podcasting side of things. First of all, a few quick things. Gui has recommended the audio brand or sonic brand of Intel, which immediately comes to my brain. I can hear it.
Absolutely.
Crystal has asked you to spell the music. Crystal, do you mind sharing exactly if you Google what? You said if you Google this, you'll find it. What is it that you said to Google?
Oh, sorry. I see David responded with lo-fi hip hop, so I wasn't sure if the question was pink noise or lo-fi hip hop.
No, David's got it. Thanks, David. Appreciate you diving in there. Appreciate that. Listen, I know that sonic brand also can be an identifier for a popular or for your favorite podcast. And I can hear the opening of everything from This American Life, which was one of the first podcasts I was ever introduced to WTF, to SmartList. There's a bunch that come on, and I'm sure all of you have your own favorite. But let's start by asking Raul, what's your favorite podcast?
Yeah, oh God, that's like answering who's my favorite artist or music. It's always a tough one to answer. Yeah. I'm going to go with what I'm currently I'm most actively been listening to. And I don't have one, actually, I have a few. So the most favorite and the one that adds most value to me is the Future podcast by Chris Do. I love that it's very consistent. I love how, to the point it is. And without sort of going through many different silos, it stays very much on track and on point and on topic. I see Janet is asking a question. It's Chris Do, spelled as D-O. Chris Do. And the podcast is called The Future, spelled as F-U-T-U-R, The Future Podcast. So that is one of my favorite podcasts. And I can go on why it's my favorite. And the other two that I really love and would come maybe in the same places, most favorite or close second and third, would be the Pitchfork Review podcast. It's spelled as P-I-T-C-H, Pitchfork, F-O-R-K, the Pitchfork Review. This whole podcast is about objectively analyzing the songs that are coming out and why they're becoming hits, or what are some of the pitfalls in terms of an artist, a rapper, a singer, songwriter, or a music producer, the behind the scenes and the breaking down on the inner workings of a hit song or any song for that matter. And last but not least, this is slightly offbeat and may not be as popular as the first two, and that is a podcast by CBC, and it's called Tony Ho. This is one really wild podcast. You should definitely listen to it on headphones when kids are not around, because it's only for adults, and it's full of all kinds of unexpected situations. And it's not your typical conversational podcast. And I'm not saying that conversation podcasts are not ideal for me, because Chris Do and Pitchfork are conversational podcasts where, it's an interview style setting or a monologue of somebody sharing their thoughts. But Tony Ho is a scripted podcast. It's narrative, it's storytelling, like an audio drama. And I love the production value and the storytelling. It's extremely engaging, and it's full of unexpected moments and twists and turns. So there you have it. Those are the 3 podcasts that I've been listening to, and I highly recommend you checking it out.
And I think everyone loves hearing recommendations for podcasts. I know I do. And so as I go into my next question for Raul, drop your favorite podcast into the chat so that we can see those recommendations, and we can also collect them and share them out with everybody at a later date. So drop those in, and I'm going to keep going, Raul. Let's talk about podcasting. People that I work with, people like myself, I do this webinar. I call it a webinar because it's interactive, but it could be a podcast. So let's just start with the obvious question. Why should you create a podcast? And I'm going to, what the follow-up is going to be is who should create a podcast? So let's start with the first one. Why should someone think about starting one?
Absolutely. In fact, it's just one of the 5 W's that I always ask clients and whoever I'm consulting with, and starting with the why. Now, your why may be different from mine, depending on your industry, what your motive is. Are you somebody who is looking at monetizing a podcast? Or are you simply looking at it as a content strategy? Now, so assuming that those factors and those variables can change what my answer is to a specific why to an industry or an individual, generally speaking, here's a couple of reasons, and it's not exhaustive by any means. It is your opportunity to showcase and demonstrate thought leadership. When you are putting out a podcast, it is your opportunity to put out your voice, your thoughts, and just like I said, your thought leadership about the matter or the field in which you are a subject matter expert. It's content marketing, because just think about it, creating a podcast, and it's one of the most efficient media assets to create for yourself. Now, as we go into the inner workings of podcasts, you will understand that there is a lot of planning and process that goes into it. But when you compare it with, let's say, something like a video-based content, like a YouTube video or something that's of a high production value, a lot less goes into creating a podcast. So it's a very efficient means of creating content, and by those means or through that, content marketing, it's a great way for learning. And when I say learning, I mean it, it's a two-way street. You could be imparting a lot of wisdom and a lot of great guidelines and key takeaways to your audience. But at the same time, it's also an opportunity when you're discussing either a topic where you are an expert, or maybe it's a completely different topic where you are interviewing someone, so that it helps you as much as your audience is. It's a learning that's sort of a two-way street. And who doesn't want that? You're building a community, and you're having pre-qualified leads. If one of your goals is to also make sure that you're reaching out to potential clients. And I'll sum up by saying, some of the sort of other thought starters of why you should create a podcast is you're creating a speaking opportunity. You're cross-pollinating audiences. So for example, if I have someone who's in my network who's, just take this webinar as an example, is logged on, is viewing, they become part of Nick's audiences and vice versa. You're cross-pollinating audiences. And then all of this to say that you're creating a very strong media and online presence for yourself as an individual and or an organization you work for. So those are some of again, this isn't by no means an exhaustive list, but there are so many whys, and it can be different for a different person or industry.
Great. Before we dive into how, what are the ingredients? Like, what makes a great podcast? And by the way, Sarah, Dolly Parton's America was fantastic. I'm going to just give you a thumbs up on that one. And I saw a lot of other ones, but Raul, what makes a great podcast?
Sorry, I was chuckling at my some of the suggestions in the chat, and I'm definitely going to add some of that to my list. So thank you. Okay. What makes a great podcast? Again, the attributes and the main facets depend on the industry and what we're talking about. But there are, generally speaking, certain basic principles that should apply to every podcast, which is consistency. you have a consistent format that your audiences get used to. Just think about it. Like, for example, if you're watching a Netflix show, if one episode was for 10 minutes and the second episode was for 45 minutes, it's going to throw you off.
Are you referring to the latest season of Stranger Things, which they're all like 90 minutes in length? Anyway, sorry, I had to throw that out there. I enjoyed it, but it just threw me off.
Yeah, like, okay, what happened? Yeah, I know. No, yet to watch that, but yeah, it's that's an example too. So, and again, duration is just one of the many aspects that that apply to a podcast. I mean, consistency in every sense. The way your narration style, the way you interview, if it's a conversational podcast, like the one, if this were to be a podcast in how we are having a conversation, but at the same time it's interactive with a live audience. So consistency is key. Whether it's duration, your format, style, whether you have a packaged intro and outro, connecting the dot back to sonic strategy, right? Of making sure that you have a strong sonic identity. And again, podcasting, now it is a two-edged sword. If you recall, just a moment ago, I said it's one of the most efficient content assets to create for yourself because it's purely audio based. I mean, think about it. If I had to now turn this into a YouTube video, I'd be looking at investing in a 2 or 3 grand worth of camera equipment, another sort of amount of money for lighting, so many other variable factors, and then the video data, post-production on video and all of that stuff, versus podcasts where I have to make sure that I'm in a quiet space. I've got a decent microphone. I obviously must have something good to talk about that's listener worthy, so to speak, and package it all in a way that is professional and something that will find an audience. So again, coming back to my answer, consistency, making sure that you are providing value, because and sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought. So I was saying, because podcasting is a double-edged sword, right? So on one hand, it's easy to produce, and for the very same reason, it's also getting increasingly saturated very quickly.
Yes.
And so it's important to kind of provide that unique value and show if there is something that really the audience is learning when there are 10 other podcasts that are talking about the same thing as you are. So that's important as well.
Absolutely. So starting a value, making sure that there's something, and I'm hoping that everyone can see. In fact, somebody just asked me, is this free? Which means that there's value. If somebody's asking is if we're giving this away, and the short answer is absolutely yes. There's a reason why I want to interview people like Rahul and provide service and information to people all over the world. Let's talk about starting it. So actually, can I get a show of hands, a yes, if people have thought about starting one? Just and don't be shy. Yeah, show of hands or drop it into the chat. Awesome. All right, Rahul, we've got a lot of people thinking about this. What would you tell someone just starting, and how do they go about doing it?
First of all, it's amazing to see so many who have either started already or planning to start. Here's how I would encourage you to look at podcasting. It's just like, again, this may sound contradictory to what I said. I absolutely mean that podcast is one of the most efficient content assets to create for yourself. But this is the perfect time for me to also say, well, if you are prepared and there is planning in place and there's semi-automation that takes place, it can become super efficient as you go along. So to answer the question head on, here's how I would encourage you to look at podcasts. Divide it into 5 different buckets, starting with pre-production. Okay. And just in case if anyone's furiously taking away notes, don't worry. There will be a handout that Nick and I will be giving away after the webinar at some point. And that will include a lot of the key takeaways that I'm talking about right now. But I mean, feel free to make your own notes. So
I just want to jump in here and just say, like, Rahul has taken the time to develop a really great summary with some key links and information. It'll come out as part of a broadcast for those of you that registered for the podcast. It'll come out that way to anybody that registered. So just stand by and keep an eye for that, as well as a replay of the video. Sorry, go ahead, Rahul. So
thanks,
number one,
so,
pre-production.
Pre-production is like, what is pre-production? Your research. Why are you doing this podcast? Are you doing this because you want to monetize the podcast? You want to become one of the top podcasters? And are you looking at metrics such as number of downloads, subscribers, streaming revenue, and all of that? sort of thing, starting with a why, and then going into the who. And when I say who, it means not just who should be doing a podcast. And I think by the show of hands, I feel that everyone's very clear on who should be that, because it clearly looks like you care about it and you understand and you see the value behind it. But I also mean who in sort of two other ways, which is one, who's your target audience, right? Because everything that we want to talk about and we're passionate to talk about applies as much and is dependent so much on how its relevancy to our target audience. And second, if it's supposed to be a conversational podcast, like if this were to be a podcast, then who are going to be your guests? Start making a list of guests, 10, 15, 20, and plan ahead of time of the number of episodes you go on. A generally good strategy is when you launch a podcast is to have at least 3-4 episodes ready. So then, you have something that's instant. It's that instant gratification of somebody listened to your first episode and they go like, oh, you know what? I want to learn more. And you're not leaving them hanging. And there's already, a lot of stuff that they can sink their teeth into. So research, knowing who the who is, writing down all your key takeaways, maybe breaking it down by episode. What your title and description is going to be. That's going to hugely impact your SEO and how your podcast will end up being discovered. There are so many ways where your podcast can also get recommended, through Twitter or other social media feeds and stuff, of channels that aggregate and recommend podcasts to potential future audiences. So that's your pre-production. Now, again, each one of these buckets, I can spend an hour easily, and I do so over multiple consultation with my clients. So pre-production, moving on, production. Production is where, things like the tactical things come into play. And these are the kind of things that I closely oversee when I'm helping somebody out, which is to record intro and outro, again, connecting the dot to a strong sonic identity. Like when you listen to a Gary Vaynerchuk podcast, there's that snap. And even if I'm not looking at the screen, I know that's him. For example, just an example that came to the top of my mind. Intro and outro, copyright check. Make sure that if there is a music or a piece of music that you haven't custom created or commissioned to a composer to create for you, then make sure that when you license it off a website, that it is, you have the rights to license it and distribute it globally. So copyright check, right?
That's if I could just jump in on that second one there, because
yes.
I've experienced this in a negative way. I did an interview like this with some PowerPoint at the beginning and at the end, and I guess one image in my PowerPoint made it in and it wasn't copyright friendly, and I'd Facebook Live the event. This one is not Facebook Live today, but I did it in the past. And it was taken down. It was saying that there's an image that, here's the fascinating thing. It was an image of the Earth from space. And so it was taken down. So we have to be careful about that for whatever we're doing, but especially if we're going to be broadcasting out to a general audience. Sorry, go ahead, Raul.
No worries. Thanks for the example. Any copyrighted material, visual, audio, or otherwise. So that's production, making sure all the tactical things are in place. And I can dive into it a little bit more, as we go forward. But I want to make sure that I, give a bird's eye view to this question, because production is one of my expertise, and I can go down the rabbit hole easily just due to my passion about the topic. Now, after the recording is captured, and make sure that everything is captured as cleanly and as neatly as possible, making sure that your post-production is tight. Here's a very important note about post-production. Nick and I, when we were having a conversation very casually about podcast, and I believe, Nick, you asked me something along the lines of, well, what's the ideal duration for a podcast episode of this nature? And I said, you know what? Frankly, no one knows the exact answer. It's still an up and coming industry. And as general, it's not like your standard television format that's been going on for decades, where you have this 22-minute episode, you have the rest of the time slot for ads and promos. Now that used to be in traditional broadcast sense. Now things are changing because of the Netflix and the Amazon Primes of the world. But, with podcasting, it's a bit of a wild, wild west when it comes to duration. So I want to emphasize and bring home this point in post-production, that apart from making sure that, your voice sounds clean, you don't have all these any sort of unnecessary noises and all of those clinical and surgical things taken care of.
Yep.
Pay some attention to things that you think can be taken out from. edit it out. It could be a fun small talk or a conversation that you and your guests are having, and maybe it means something to you. But guess what? Audiences are saturated. There's never been a time in history where, as humanity, as people, we've had such easy access to an infinite amount of content across the globe. I mean, as a millennial, I have used rotary phones as a kid and have waited for hours for my favorite show on TV, to a point where my 9-year-old asked me, well, can I skip this ad? And I was like, I wish I had that option, right? So just pay attention to the fact that people are saturated and exposed to a lot of content. Can you make your 45-minute raw conversation and turn it into a 20-minute key takeaway? Can you remove some of the stuff that is maybe not super important? Then pay attention to that in post-production. And I will leave with 2 other buckets that I'm not personally an expert in, but I closely work with my partners at the agency where I oversee production mostly, which is distribution and marketing. Now, distribution is still up and coming. In my handout after the webinar, I will be including some companies to watch out for. One such that comes to mind is actually a Canadian company by the name Co-Host, and they've launched literally weeks ago. This is how new distribution is. And then, of course, marketing, both organic as well as paid. So these are the 5 buckets: pre-production, production, post-production, distribution, and marketing. These are some of the things that you should think of when you are starting, or if you've already started a podcast, to streamline and semi-automate your process. So over time, like I said, I was not lying when I said it's one of the most efficient content assets to produce if all of this planning is done in place.
Yeah, and Rahul, I mean,
I hope that answers your question, Nick.
It's excellent. It's awesome. And one of the things that we did was that pre-planning meeting, right? Where we chatted not just about some of the questions that I might ask, and but also, what you and I think would be most compelling for an audience. We can't literally ask them live until we see you and get that information. So we kind of did a preconceived thinking about what would provide value for the audience. Let's talk about the tech, because that's kind of some people like to nerd out on that stuff. I've got this. This is my Blue Yeti that I purchased. I kind of feel like I'm under delivering on my audio when I'm interviewing someone like yourself. So what's the tech that you need in order to get started on a podcast? So the tools.
That's completely like my wheelhouse, and I nerd out on those kind of things. But first of all, I want to address something you mentioned. I'm not a gear snob just because I worked in a professional setting in audio and music. I mean, the microphone that I'm using is actually one of the cheaper microphones by Blue. And what you're using is also by the same company and is actually more expensive than the one that I'm using. So the point is not that you're not using something that is, and again, this is something that I use for my Zoom conversations. I mean, when I go into a studio, there are more sophisticated equipments that come into play, but all that to say that I'm not a gear snob. And here's what I believe in. I like to work based on the resources, whether it's monetary or otherwise, that everyone has at their disposal. Let's start with what you have. How can we make this resourceful? So here's what I would say. If you tell me and say, listen, I have a very, very finite amount of maybe shoestring budget, and I do not want to invest not rather money into buying expensive gears. Smartphones these days with the default USB microphones or cheaper USB microphones that you can buy that plug into your handheld devices or straight into your PC or Mac are doing an excellent job at capturing audio. And again, to that spirit, I have come up with my own acronym. And I hope there is no sort of an incidental thing online that is similar to what I'm about to say, but I've come up with my own acronym, and that stands for, and that's VRSA, VRSA. V for voice, R for recording, S for surrounding, and A for audio branding. Now, I'm not going to spend so much time on audio branding since we've already covered that, but this kind of answers your question, which is V, your voice. Nick and I were joking about how before the webinar, just do a little bit of vocal warm-ups, make sure you're hydrated. And here's the thing: if you're not hydrated, for example, you tend to get a lot of these unwanted lip or mouth clicks, as a lot of the audio producers call it. And there's actually, believe it or not, it's so common. There is a dedicated audio plugin that professionals use, like dialogue editors and like who are working on Hollywood movies use, that using AI and machine learning take out mouth clicks, and there's a dedicated plugin just for that, right?
Hey, Raul, we
yes.
got a little bit of feedback, which is really great. Appreciate it. Slow it down. You've got so much that you're going out. And I'm saying this because we talked about this. If you weren't here earlier, Raul said, I speed up. So I'm asking you to slow down because some of the folks want to hear that acronym again. Can you just slowly say what those VERSA stands for again?
I apologize, and I'm glad I gave that warning ahead of time. So, and thanks for reminding me. So that acronym is V as in voice,
Yeah.
R for recording, S for surrounding, and A for audio branding. This will be, I hope this will serve you as a starting point when it comes to the tech and the equipment and the core production bucket that I spoke about. This is not an all-encompassing strategy for how to go about making a podcast.
So A stands for audio
branding.
Branding. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm just putting it up there. There we go. Look, we only have this is going so quickly. I've got dozens of questions, but also people have questions. So I want to make sure that I ask at least one or two more before we finish. And there were some great questions. Somebody asked, now, Bernie, I think this is the question. How do you create and record your own sounds from your surroundings? I'm not sure if that, but it says create and record your own sounds from your surroundings, question mark. I don't know if it was a response, but
it was more about, because you have copyright on sounds, right? And if you're in your own space, you got a pot, you got a pan or a spoon, there you go. If it blends in, obviously it's got to fit, right?
I love how creative and resourceful you are with that, Bernie. So if I get your question correctly, you mean to say if you have a couple of objects at home, maybe whether it's a musical instrument or not, and if you sort of creatively put it together to form your own sonic logo, which is like your quick intro and outro. Absolutely, yes. In fact, you could actually turn that in a very strong and in a positive way where, hey, did you hear that guy Bernie's podcast? Like, I really thought that using a utensil or maybe like a door slam on his Hyundai or Cadillac, he used this really cool sound. Like, and you know what? I just want to add something real quick there. Volkswagen did this very cool creative on TikTok, whereas Bernie, it's something along the lines of what you just asked. So a couple of TikTokers, they did an acapella where the entire music was created using car sounds from the Volkswagen ID4 or ID3, one of their EV cars. And it got so popular and it got so viral that Volkswagen actually reached out to them, bought it as a license so they could promote their brand using it. That's again part of the sonic strategy. And again, to answer your question, Bernie, absolutely do that. And that could work absolutely in your favor. So yes.
Excellent.
Where do you see Evelyn So has asked, hello, Evelyn, where do you see the podcast fit within an existing content strategy? If somebody already has an established blog or good following on Medium?
So this, this is something that a lot of companies are already doing. So Evelyn, I take it that, or I'm assuming here, please, chime in and clarify if I'm mistaken. When you say existing content, I believe you're referring to written blogs, or is it sort of or do you have video content that's already published and you're wondering how do you convert that into podcasts? Am I getting it right?
In a way, because I'm definitely more a writer than an audio person.
Yes.
But love attending this. That's the reason why I sort of learn about the whole sonic branding, right? So I don't have an established blog. That's part of my bigger strategy. So a lot of people, they might already have the blog content, and a lot of them, they do the cross-pollination through writing. So, the same blog, maybe break it down, post a bit of a medium, et cetera, right? But podcast is sort of like something on their own. And there are, of course, a lot of podcasts that have their own website, have their own blog articles as well. So how do you see the two like if podcast is not your only content out there in the world, if you already have a blog, or start with a podcast and support it with a blog.
That's great. You know what? Thanks for clarifying your question. It can work both ways, Evelyn. So if you have an existing content in form of a blog or video, with video, it's much easier because unless you have a lot of illustrations or things that are heavily dependent on visuals for people to understand and get context of what you're talking about, you have to ask yourself, is most of the content you're discussing in the video, can it be understood without the visual context and the visual support? If the answer is mostly yes, then that's an easy conversion. So that's just one of the ways of looking at it. The other way of looking at is you're converting your blogs into podcasts. If your blogs are structured in a way where it almost sounds organic and natural, that you hear yourself or somebody talking about it in that manner, you can adapt it very easily to a podcast, either by speaking about it yourself, have someone else speak to it, or this is something I'm not a huge fan of, but I understand in some situations, it probably is the best solution, which is using a lot of lifelike AI voices to read out what your content is, because your text is already there. And guess what? Now, because it's an AI-based thing, a lot of the production-related things where, worrying about equipment, making sure you sound right, making sure, you're not speeding up like me and not being able to, and not being understood by people. A lot of those things get taken out of the mix. And then it becomes much easier for you to package it by putting in other elements like your intro and outro, having a title that helps your SEO and helps your podcast to be delivered, having a great thumbnail that is relevant to that particular episode or to the overarching podcast. So again, I know that this is a very high level answer, but I hope that helps, and I'm happy to sort of dive into it deeper.
Raul?
No, it helps a lot. Thank you, Raul. I think what you said earlier about having it's a two-way communication, that kind of answered that question too. That blog and all that is not two-way always.
I'm going to jump in here very quickly, Raul and Evelyn. Thank you for your question. We have actually way more questions than we have time for, and because we're out of time. And so Arez had a question, and so a couple of things. I'm happy to stick around. I don't know, Raul, what your time is like after this. If you have a few more minutes, if we can go a little later. I don't want to. You've already been such a gracious guest, and I don't want to put you on the spot. If you've got a 3 o'clock you got to get to, then I don't want to hold you up.
Don't worry about it. I have left buffer, and I'm happy to stick around for sure.
So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to wrap this up, and then Raul and I are going to stick around for 5 extra minutes from 3 to 3:05 to see if we can answer some extra questions. But I would like to actually, because people are going to have to jump, I want to do a formal thank you to Raul. I'm going to say that this has been an extraordinarily valuable for me, and I think for many others, based on all of the questions, people asking, is this recorded? Is it free? This is a good example of quality content. So Raul, I want to thank you for being such a wonderful guest. And I can't recommend working with Raul enough. Raul, before we say goodbye, what can people do if they want to learn more or connect with you? How do they do so?
Well, thanks again, Nick. For my contact information, you will find that in the handout that I believe, Nick, your team will be sending out tomorrow morning or at some point tomorrow. I'm happy to mention that in the chat, but just to keep things organized, you will find my email, my website, all of my contact information, and how I could potentially help you. Or if you just want to have a chat and have any further questions for me, I'm very approachable and always open to questions. So again, in terms of contacting me, you will find all of that information in the handout that Nick and his team will be sending out at some point tomorrow, along with what I promised in terms of like the tips and everything. So yeah. Perfect.
Thank you, Raul. And in terms of what's next for us, we have another webinar, I should say, coming up with President of Chandos Construction, Tim Caldwell. He's talking about leadership and communication. One of the most eloquent speakers and leaders I've had the privilege of working with. And speaking of working with, I just want to quickly say share we do at Kindler and Company, we have a number of programs to help leaders who want to take their thought leadership and take it to the next level. So we have an accelerator program, one-on-one coaching. If you have an organization, we provide custom workshops. Of course, there's specific coaching that you can do as groups as well as keynotes. I'm not going to do a lot, but if you're interested in learning more about them, I believe Simona is going to drop a link in the chat to book a strategy session. If you're interested in learning more about how to save time, get clear, and stand out as a leader, we can do that and drop in, and that link will come in. It should come in momentarily. And then finally, and there it is, Simona just dropped it in. And finally, Simona, who are the 3 winners of the books, the 3 copies of the book Impact? Who has won those 3 books?
Give me 2 seconds. You put me on the spot.
I
Sorry.
have that information, Nick.
What's that?
I have that. I'm going to drop it in the
Oh,
chat.
Sorry, this is Vanessa who works here at
Hi,
Kindler and Company.
everyone. Okay, so we have 3 here.
There you go. Arez, Tara, and Sue. Fantastic. Now,
Yay.
Arez, I think you may have a copy, but you get a second copy. And same with you, Sue. I'm not sure. But either way, if you want those copies, let us know. And you can email Simona at Kindler and Company. The address is there. I want to say again, thank you, first of all, to our guest, Raul, for sharing. You're awesome, super talented, super articulate, and I'm super grateful. I'm also grateful for all of you who attended today. And please share if you found this valuable. Please let us know. We'd love to hear what you thought of the podcast or the webinar, I should say. And also, if you think that you might be interested in learning more about our programs, there's a link there to connect with us so that we can have a meeting. I'm going to pause, say goodbye to everybody. Then we're going to
Thank you all. Thank you so much.
extend for 5 more minutes and chat with Raul. So thanks, everybody. If you have to jump off, jump off. If you're sticking around, we'll take a few more questions.
All right.
So I know